This Week in Radio Tech, episode 224, is brought to you by the TELUS Zip 1 automatic IP audio codec. Easy to use, and it's automatic. By Lavo, maker of the new crystal clear virtual radio console. Intuitive, progressive, and focused, Crystal Clear is the radio console with a multi-touch touchscreen interface. And by Axia. Consoles, mixing engines, intercoms, phones, audio processors, only Axia connects to so much, so easily. We're talking with Scott Fybush, editor of Northeast Radio Watch, about the near end of Radio Disney and what that portends for the rest of the radio industry. Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host. This is the show where we talk about broadcasting technology on the audio side, the radio side of things. Everything from the microphone here in front of the talent. I guess we should talk about needles and styluses and styli and turntables sometime. That's a great subject. We were talking about that yesterday, actually, at a convention. This show where we talk about radio technology and all the stuff that brings audio entertainment to millions of listeners around the world, and we cover so many little parts of that. I'm Kirk Harnack, the host of the show. Our show is brought to you by three terrific sponsors. Glad to have them on board. First of all, the folks at Lavo and their Crystal Clear console. Also brought to you by the folks at TELUS, who employ me, and this week, the Zip 1 IP audio codec. Got a great success story for you too, so stick around for that. And also by Axia, leading the way in so many ways in technology for audio over IP. All right, let's bring in our co-host, the best dressed engineer in radio from New York. It's Chris Tobin. Hey, Chris, welcome in on this fine Thursday.
Fine Thursday it is. Thank you, Kirk. Yeah, it's actually here in the New York City area. It's blue skies and a couple of puffy clouds. It's very nice. Very moderate weather.
Are you in your office? Or are you stealing somebody else's again?
No, today I'm in my office.
Okay.
Very subdued, very plain.
Spartan,
yes. Spartan, but not to be confused with the folks from Sparta.
You get your lovely wife in there to do some decorating. Is she the decorator in the family, or are you?
Oh, certainly. No, I'm not. I have input, and I've been told it's been very decent, but final say, as we all know, goes the other way.
I'm usually told thanks, but no thanks.
No, I've been very fortunate. I guess I have somewhat of a creative side that it does come out once in a while. The
extent of my decorating around the Harnack household is, Kirk, can I have your checkbook, please?
That's a common decorating tool for everybody.
Yeah, that's right. Excuse me. Oh, gosh. I'm so pleased to introduce our guest today, and I look forward every time that we have Scott Fybush on the show. Scott is a great friend, and he's a friend to everybody in broadcasting. If you've been in broadcasting any time at all, you know this guy's name. Scott, welcome into the show. Glad you're here.
Glad to be here again.
Hey, and where is here for you? Is this are you calling in from your home, your office at home?
I am at home in my incredibly messy office. I'm not going to turn the camera around to show you the rest of it. It's a disaster at the moment. But yes, I am at home in Rochester, New York. If you listen real carefully, we've got an air show going on this week. We have the Thunderbirds doing some practice runs over the house about an hour and a half ago. So we'll see. Maybe we'll catch them again before the end of this.
Wow, that's awesome. Roger, have you guys got a ton of rain, or did just Long Island get all the rain?
We didn't get the flooding that they did, but we've had the brief afternoon monsoons every day for a couple of days running now.
Gotcha. So, Scott, I don't know where I first came across your name. It might well have been in association with your calendar, this annual calendar that every month you get a new tower. And but Scott, tell us, for those who don't know, tell us a little bit about Scott Fybush and why do so many people know your name?
I describe myself as a news guy who's learned how to speak fluent engineer. My background is actually in the news business. I started out in Massachusetts at WCAP in Lowell, and then at a little station called WBZ in Boston that you might have heard of. Mm-hmm. And I was a news writer and an editor, and then came back home to Rochester, went slumming in TV for a couple of years. You can see, obviously, this is not the face you want to see necessarily doing TV. We'll leave that at this point to Kirk and his little weather moonlighting. And I realized along the way I enjoyed writing about radio, and started writing for Paul McLean over at Radio World, and had been doing my own column since even before the web, really, called Northeast Radio Watch. It's been going every week. We just hit the 20th anniversary of that, and then the calendar, and Tower Site of the Week that's shown up every week on the website since, I think, 2000 or thereabouts. And somewhere there, I still keep my finger in radio, too. I do some work at WXXI here in Rochester, filling in anchoring once in a while when I need to get behind a mic briefly. So I keep fingers in a lot of different places.
Cool. Good deal. Hey, I want to jump right in, and we'll get our first sponsor announcement done. And our first sponsor is the Telos Zip One. Now, I've got a Zip One right here behind me, and this is a 1 rack unit IP audio codec. Now, of course, there are plenty of IP audio codecs on the market. Hey, in the last 4 or 5 years, a number of them have come on the market. We used to do all of our audio from place to place, over equalized phone lines. And when we did an outside broadcast, when we got audio from the studio to the transmitter site, and from equalized phone lines, at some point in technology, the phone company actually went to a digital transmission between points. Now, they still took it in as analog and gave it back to you as analog, but in between, it was often a digital circuit, oftentimes using an aptX algorithm card that would go in their box. Then of course, we moved into ISDN, and lots of folks use that because ISDN cost per minute. Not many people use that for STL transmission, but rather just for temporary connections for ball games or symphony concerts or remote broadcasts. But ISDN is going away too. Hey, in the U.S., they're talking about completely pulling the plug in 2019, and a couple companies aren't even taking any orders now anymore for new ISDN, and that's ISDN BRI. So what's replacing it? Well, IP is replacing it. That is, sometimes the public internet, or it could be a private IP connection, could be an IP radio. And no matter what kind of connection it is, there's probably going to be some kind of irregularity going on. These services from the phone company tended to be guaranteed. The good news was they were guaranteed. The bad news was if it didn't work, then you couldn't do a thing about it except call the phone company. Probably they'd fix it, but service isn't what it used to be. IP connections have good and bad points. The bad point is it may not work like you want, and it seems like it's out of your hands. The good news is you have options. If you're going to get IP from one place to another, you probably can do it more than one way. And you can choose the equipment that's going to connect to that IP connection. The Zip One is a great choice, and some of the reasons why we'll just walk you through a couple of them here. First of all, it's easy to use. My goodness, you get the Zip One plugged into your network, hook it to the internet, give it a friendly name, and bam, it's connected to our Zip server, which is free to use. That means there's presence information. Now, you can hide that if you want to behind a password protected group if you like, but I can make a Zip call to another unit. How about we call this one in Austria? That's right, I just connected to Austria. And oops.
Du natürlich nicht fehlen. Es ist restlos ausverkauft schon seit langem und diesmal haben meine Neffen Andrea und Luigi auf Sizilien.
That's the audio that's coming from somewhere in Austria. I'm still not exactly sure who it is, but I call them every now and then. The Zip One can give you great audio IP connections using any one of a variety of codecs, from a low bitrate codec like G722 to super fast linear connections if you want to do linear. AAC, the whole family. MPEG Layer 2 is in there as well. So there's lots of great options. Plus, it's compatible with other codecs and other pieces of software, like Lucy Live on your smartphone. That's a great option to use if you want to go out and do a live remote, and certainly people are doing that now. So check it out on the web, if you would, at telos-systems.com. It's the Telos Zip One. And I got a, I can't find it. Oh, yeah, I did. I got a great letter from a customer of the Zip One, and he says, "Hey, Kirk, we spoke some weeks ago about me selling my Zip One because I'm not going to start my company after all." Well, I turned around. I did start the company, and I've been cranking out work. And guess what? I've been using the Zip One almost every day in session. He says, "I'm a super fan of this box. Even though I've heard good things about," and he mentions a couple competitors, "I still love using a hardware box with its floating point bandwidth. Just wanted to let you know, honestly," says this customer, "it's the coolest thing since sliced bread." By the way, this guy's in the #1 market in the country. He's in New York up there with you guys. The Zip One, check it out on the web at telos-systems.com. All right, let's get right into the show here with Scott Fybush and Chris Tobin with us. Scott, the big news that's been on the headlines for the last couple of days is Radio Disney. Tell me what's going on.
Yes, they just announced yesterday that they are going to sell off their remaining radio stations. They've been doing this in bits and pieces At one point, I think they owned 70 or 80 stations around the country. They sold off the small ones, and then they sold off the ones in the 50-sized markets. They said, we're going to stick with radio in the top 25 markets. As of yesterday, they said now, come September, they are going to sell everything they have, except they're keeping one station in Los Angeles, I think so they can pay lower streaming rates so they can still be a broadcaster.
Yeah.
But they said, you know what? We did a survey, and we figured out of everybody who tunes into Radio Disney over the course of a week, you know what the percentage was that was tuning it in on terrestrial radio?
Chris Tobin, do you have any idea? Take a stab. He's speechless. Chris is absolutely speechless. And
Well, I have to say I was there in the beginning with Radio Disney, so yeah, I'm speechless. No, yeah, it was probably like a -1, I guess, listing.
It was better than that, 18%.
Oh,
Okay,
really?
that's good.
18%. The majority at this point, I think Sirius XM was responsible for about 30%, various streaming services, another 30% or so. They make it available on a whole bunch of other platforms. And so they're saying, you know what, this is no longer worth it to us to continue to maintain all this steel and all these transmitters and all these AM sites that for the most part are only reaching part of these markets anyway, especially at night. We're moving off this platform. We're going to focus on other platforms. So that was a pretty big shock. So these stations will all be put on the market. Disney will go off of them as of September 26th. If there's a buyer in place, they'll start with a new buyer right then. If not, they will go dark until somebody makes a bid and is ready to take them over.
Wow. Now, I want to make sure I got that figure right. You said 18%. That's 18% of Radio Disney listening was done on the AM stations. Nobody had an 18 share, right?
No, none of these stations, for the most part, register at all in the ratings, because the audience they're looking at is generally too young to factor in, even sometimes to 12 plus. I know, for instance, in this household, my daughter was a Radio Disney listener until she hit about the age of 9 or so. And then she transitioned into top 40 radio on FM. So that went away for her pretty quickly. It's tough. What they were playing, a lot of cases, their music has become top 40 music. Look at what's on the charts right now. And it's a lot of artists that got their start there. So they're not abandoning Radio Disney per se. They're just saying this is not the platform for us. And I think you have to look at it to a certain extent historically, because you're talking about a network that started in 1996. And I've asked the question repeatedly. If it's 1996 and somebody says to you, I want to start a national audio service, and I want to reach as many people as I can in the top, let's say, 100 markets around the country, and I want to do it as efficiently and economically as I can, how would you do it in 1996? And their answer at that point was, we'll get a lot of AM stations because they're cheap, and we'll put it up there. But it was never meant to save AM radio. It was meant simply to be an economical platform. And at the point where it ceased to be an economical platform for them, they said, okay, we'll move on to what's next.
That's absolutely true.
Was Radio Disney ever on FM channels?
They've had a couple over the years. One of the stations they're selling off in Indianapolis was an FM. They had one, I think Little Rock was an FM. They had a couple of affiliates. But, think about, again, the period when they were really building this network, say 96 through 2000, was the point where FM expenses, you couldn't buy an FM for under $100 million in a big market. Yeah. Even AMs they paid a lot for. 1560 in New York, the old WQXR AM, later WQEW. They paid $40 million for that radio station when they bought that from the New York Times. They're not going to recoup anywhere near that when they go to sell it.
Chris Tobin, what was your involvement with Radio Disney? Have to do with ABC Radio Network?
Yes, I was at the network, and we were the engineering team in New York and Dallas was tasked with building out the infrastructure and programming and taking care of on-location broadcasts, and you name it, we did it. We distributed a lot of the audio via the satellite channels. Yeah, I was there in the beginning with the folks, and it was meant to be a distribution to get the Disney brand out. That's basically it. So Scott's absolutely right. When it became no longer economically feasible, time to move on. But 1996, that was the best choice they had, and it was made sense at the time.
Just thinking about in a little over 2 weeks, I'm taking the family to Disney in Florida for a day. I guess their advertising works.
Get up AM 990. It'll be the last time you get to hear it.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
990 in Orlando.
Yes, that's one of the facilities they're selling off. It's going to be interesting because each of these facilities has its own unique little quirks to it. There are some, like that Orlando facility, where they're selling a license. They don't own the tower site. I believe Cox owns that tower site, which is an interesting site. We should talk about this one sometime because it's one of the rare community FM sites that's also got a directional AM there. So it's a modern, if you've been in one of these new community transmitter buildings, the long concrete block corridor with everybody's individual rooms off on one side. Most of them have FMs in them, and then you open one door, and there's a 50 kilowatt Nautel on a phaser sitting next to it that's feeding. It's a 6-tower array out back, all told. There are others where the stations will come with land. Cleveland, I think, comes with the land. San Francisco comes with the land. There's one, the Seattle station just lost its nighttime site, and I don't know what they're going to do up there.
What these Radio Disney stations, were a lot of them rather high power stations, or were a lot of them, in the 5 and 10 kilowatt range?
A lot of them were right in that sort of middle ground. There were a couple of 50s in there. New York City on 1560 was full-time 50,000 watts. The station that serves Philadelphia out of southern New Jersey is 50 day, and it drops down to like 1,500 watts or something at night. It's not especially powerful at night, but a lot of these, what they could buy when they were able to buy were these regional stations. And at one time, a lot of them had been major players in the market. The old WTAE 1250 in Pittsburgh is one of them. The old Wixie 1260 in Cleveland is another one. The old KDIA in Oakland is one of them. And these are the stations, and I wrote about this, and we'll get, I think, into talking a little bit about the AM improvement proceeding. When I filed my comments with the FCC about it, one of the things I pointed out was there's this whole group of stations now that aren't the big, massive 50,000 watt WSMs or WLWs or what have you. And they're not the little local kilowatts that can still manage to serve a small town very adequately. There are all these stations, like the 1300 in Chicago, for instance, is one of them, that covers a chunk of the market by day. It covers a smaller chunk of the market by night, but it's not a full market station. And it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of buyer comes forward and says, it's worth it for me to pay $2 million, $3 million, $5 million to get my hands on this thing.
How many of these will go Spanish?
I think you'll see some go Spanish. I think based on what's happened with a lot of their previous sales, you'll see a lot go religious. We know looking around the country that various Catholic broadcasters have been extremely, extremely aggressive in station purchasing. And some of these are markets like Philadelphia that don't yet have a robust Catholic radio presence. So they probably will be buyers, as they were with some of the previous Disney facilities that got sold off. I think you'll see other foreign language groups too. It's interesting, up in Minneapolis, and there's a Disney station up there that'll be sold. They're about to get their third Hmong station. The Ocean, I think they came out of Laos, the Hmong community that got resettled very extensively in Minnesota. There are now 3 AM stations surrounding Minneapolis and St. Paul that are broadcasting to that community.
Wow.
It's great local radio. It's wonderful full-service local radio. It's just not in a language you or I would understand.
Yeah.
Unless you speak Hmong, which perhaps you do. I don't know.
No, I didn't even know it existed until you just mentioned it. Wow. I was just looking at, indeed, there are some 50 kilowatters. You mentioned a couple of these already. Tempe, Los Angeles, Pasadena. Where else?
The LA
Orlando,
one is the one they're keeping.
Which one?
The LA one is the one that they're keeping.
LA.
That one, one's not going anywhere.
Gotcha.
Tempe is an interesting one. That's the old, remember KNIX, the Buck Owens station?
Oh, yeah.
That was the AM station there. And that thing is a monster across the West at night. The trouble is, when you're up there near the shortwaves with a highly directional AM, there's half the Phoenix market that doesn't hear it at night.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a challenge for somebody. Somebody will do something with it. Another neat one is the one in Detroit, which is the old WFDF out of Flint. And Disney spent a lot of money on that one. They moved it from Flint down to south of Detroit. They built a brand new, I forget if it's 6 towers or 8 towers, but a brand new from the ground up 50,000 watt directional plant for that one. And shoehorned it into the Detroit market. So again, that'll be an AM that's useful to somebody in Detroit. But whether it'll be a mass market thing or something niche, that I don't know yet.
Would you say that most, if not all of these Disney facilities, these AM transmitter sites, are they in really good shape? Some of them you said they've been totally rebuilt.
Say this for Disney. They put a lot of money into upgrading these facilities. Ground systems got replaced. They tore down, in some cases, I know of facilities where they tore down entire aging transmitter buildings and rebuilt. A lot of them got new transmitters. All of them were set up for IBOC. I think every last one of them was running HD at one point or another. And so, they broadbanded the antenna arrays and cleaned up ground systems. So, the facilities people are getting should be in decent shape. You can't say that they neglected the transmission side of their operation by any means.
And, there's an HD on the listing I'm looking at. It's on streamingradioguide.com, a list of all the Disney AM stations. Do all of them have HD radio on AM, or did they have that for a while and drop it?
They were all equipped with it. I'm pretty sure Disney put that in corporate-wide. Most of them were running it. It sounded pretty good. I got to hear some of them in HD, and with that music format, the codec was very friendly to music, and it sounded pretty good. Some of them, I understand, have been running it intermittently on and off. A couple, I think, have turned it off. I know most of the ones they've sold, even though they've sold them with the HD plant in place, a lot of these owners don't want to invest in a licensing fee and don't really see a return on it. And so a lot of them have gotten turned off after they've been sold.
Gotcha. Fascinating. And we live in some interesting times here. It's the end of an era for Radio Disney on the AM band. You explained why. That's understandable. But plenty of other people will look at this as an opportunity. You mentioned the religious broadcasters, perhaps Catholic radio, huge, large populations of Catholic people in some areas. And now you've got a signal able to hit them all. Or a large chunk of them, and then foreign language stations. Going to be interesting to see who picks these up and what they do with them, and who, as business people, who get new opportunities. And now these Disney stations, did they sell at local advertising, or was it all pretty much network 24/7?
They had local ad sales at one time. My understanding, for the most part, is they had pulled back from that. These were never, and this is part of the reason I think why people who look at this and say, oh, this is some kind of demise of the AM band, these were never designed to be radio stations as we understood them. These serve the same function for Disney that a billboard does. They serve the same function that a trailer for a Disney movie did. The idea was that the product that these stations were advertising was Disney. Buy the artists that we have on our record label. Go see the movies that we've got coming out. Go buy the DVDs that we're releasing. Come visit our theme parks, so on and so forth. So they were really intended more to be, the whole thing probably showed up at some point on some ledger somewhere as promotions for Disney in general, because that's really what it was meant to do. So they weren't as focused on selling spot time. There was a little in there. But for the most part, what they were selling was Disney. And they did a pretty good job of it. It was a good sounding station.
It sounds like, Chris Tobin, what do you think about this? It sounds like if the people who are likely to pick these stations up, to buy them from Radio Disney and put their own programming on, a number of them may not be in the business of selling local ads either. If they go to Catholic or other nationwide religious distribution, they may not be selling local ads. And if they're selling, if they're Hispanic language, they will have probably a different audience of businesses that they'll be selling ads to than the non-Spanish stations are selling to. So I guess what I'm getting is Disney hasn't been a threat to other radio stations in a market, typically low listenership and little or no ad sales, and whoever buys them may be the same picture.
Well, once they buy them, it won't be a Disney brand anymore, so it'll just be a radio station as they choose to do. If it's part of a network, a lot of these small regional, I shouldn't say small, regional networks do local sales. It's targeted. When I was with the Disney group and when that whole project launched, as Scott pointed out, it was meant to be an extension of the branding, we'll call it, the brand campaigns of Disney. And they did have some local sales, but it was not local sales as most radio stations call it. And it was just targeted. If it tied into a local event that Disney was introducing, a movie was coming out or a play on Broadway, then there was local, buy-in. But other than that, Scott's right. It was just basically an extension, a billboard, if you will. And I think people buying the properties, the assets that are being released, if it's a religious group, yes, they're probably part of a network because I've worked with several of them, and they still have local. but it's different local. It's not what a traditional, we'll call local sales team does. And I think in the Hispanic community, when I worked for Spanish broadcasters, we did both network and we had local. And the local again was very targeted, very different approach than I'm accustomed to working with, I will say, traditional local sales. I think it's a great opportunity for people, broadcasters, business people who get it, not large groups that are just looking to turn numbers.
So, Scott, we've been talking about the Disney station sales, all these AM stations. That's a good segue into AM improvement, and that's been a hot topic for a couple of years now. There is an FCC commissioner, Ajit Pai, who is very interested in AM improvement. Let's say I'm not real optimistic myself. I'm an AM station owner, own one at the moment. No, two. Own two AM stations at the moment. I'm not real optimistic except for very niche formats. Well, sure, big cities where you've got major news outlets, those are still very, very viable. Maybe I'm less optimistic than I should be. But what are you looking forward to with AM improvement? Give us a bit of the picture. What's on the table? What are people talking about to improve the AM?
The big picture of what's on the table. There was a report and order that, or actually a rulemaking proceeding that the FCC put together. We basically said, okay, we have a bunch of ideas that we want to get comment on from broadcasters, and they laid them all out. And there were some that were extremely technical. One of them, for instance, they said, hey, let's get rid of the ratchet rule, which is something that beyond the people who are watching TWiRT, probably nobody else, even in the industry, knows what the ratchet rule is. But if you've ever tried to upgrade an AM facility, especially an older AM facility, and you run afoul of this rule that says you have to reduce the interference that you are causing to other stations by 10% in order to have this approved. It was a great idea. It was well-meaning. It didn't work in practice because it restricted a lot of older facilities from upgrading because they provided so much interference to everybody else who came in after them down the road. So they said, well, do we want to get rid of that? They asked questions about, do we want to loosen the main studio requirements for AMs? They asked questions about, should we open a window for new translator applications that would be limited specifically to existing AM licensees, give them the first crack at getting whatever FM channels are still available out there, and there aren't that many of them that are left after all the various translator and LPFM windows that we've had. And they got quite a response. The filing deadline for this, if I recall correctly, was late February. I think it might have gotten pushed into March a little bit. And they got a couple hundred replies. And it's fascinating. You can go through on the FCC website and read these. There are a lot of different ideas out there. One of the things the commission did was they said, we also want to hear other things we should be considering. And a lot of people came in with opinions about what to do about HTAM, which has been obviously questionably successful at best over the years. So these comments were fascinating. The comment I filed was about 22 pages in and of itself, just kind of laying out some historical groundwork, saying, look, here are the classes of AM stations that are doing well. Here are the classes, primarily these old 5 kilowatt regionals in the middle, that just aren't well suited right now to be major players in a market the way they once would have been. And here's the kind of relief they ought to be able to get to improve. And so far, at least over the last few months now, it's just been sitting at the commission waiting for that next step to come. And that next step could come next week. It could come later this year. It could conceivably not come at all.
See, at his remarks to the Ohio broadcasters, Ajit Pai was hoping for a vote by October on some of these things. I don't know. I am not optimistic about incremental improvements at all. I think incremental improvements don't go far enough to offset the much larger incremental loss of listeners to AM. But, of course, I'm biased toward my own listening habits. I'm not a big AM listener anymore. I used to be a lot in the 80s and 90s, and I just don't listen to AM anymore myself. I'm surrounded by gear that makes it a little difficult. So I'm a bit more in favor of an all-out plan to scrap it and replace it with digital, but I realize that would be extremely painful. Chris, what are your thoughts about AM improvement? You got any?
Unfortunately, for full disclosure, I do not own any AM properties or FM broadcast properties, so I can't speak with the pain that some do have owning such things. But From what I can gather and reading and following on various different industry websites, I think incremental. Well, if it makes sense, maybe. I agree. If you try to do a full blown digital conversion, as some people have suggested, that'll just be probably a nail in the coffin or a nail in the heart, because the cost will be just too much. We saw that with HD. HD was supposed to be the I guess an incremental to eventually evolving evolutionary step to improving the broadcast spectrum in general, FM and AM. That doesn't seem to have changed anything. I still am a proponent of, if there's something worth listening to, it won't matter if it's AM or FM, people will come to it. And I think that's where it hurts. The hard part is we have become an industry of people that have just lost sight of what it took to get that listener. As Scott knows, and and me and many others who are watching and listening, 20 years ago, 25 years ago now, it's even scary when I think of it. I worked at radio stations where we did things that by today's standards, we'll call them the broadcast groups and what they believe to be the way of doing business, you couldn't even present it at the table with your general manager and expect a response other than, "Are you nuts? Get out of here. We're not going to do that. It's going to cost us." And that's what I think is part of the problem, the crux of it. You said, AM stations in major markets that are, say, a format of news or sports, they're surviving. Well, actually, they're just barely surviving. They just happen to be, have enough momentum from their 40 years of being around that keeps them going. But they're hurting as well, because people have moved to other places to get the information because the broadcasters haven't done the same. You said yourself, you can get stuff on a digital platform somewhere else that you listen to or do things. Why haven't broadcasters done the same thing? Instead, they've given away their branding to other third parties to do that for them, and they have to pay a price to do it. It doesn't make any sense. So I think it's great that the attention is brought to the AM industry. People still being told it's still viable, but I don't know what the answer is at this point. Technically, AM has its pitfalls, but so does FM. But AM, there's a lot of ways to improve it, but nobody in the industry, I think, is willing to push it. And I've read Scott's notes and what he's proposed and mentioned and talks about, and how he tries to stimulate the thought process, and he's spot on. But it's going to be a tough climb unless the industry itself really wants to do something. And you don't see much coming out of NAB.
Scott, what if
What's
other countries?
interesting?
Go ahead, Scott.
If I can just, what's interesting, Chris talks about the industry, and one of the interesting things is that it has splintered so much more so than in the days, back when nobody could own more than 5 or 10 stations. And nowadays, there are really kind of two industries, because you've got the really big guys, who operate their major market stations that are still pulling in huge revenue numbers. There's still a lot of money being made there. And there are actually a surprising number, and you don't hear about them that much, but there are a surprising number of broadcasters operating in fairly small towns, sometimes really small towns, who are making amazing amounts of money with little small town AM stations, sometimes accompanied by translators. I know of stations, little 1,000-watt graveyard stations in communities of 20, 30,000 people. Some of them are still pulling in $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 of revenue a year on a staff of 5 or 6 people. So it can be done. There's still a demand for it. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that the kind of regulatory thing that would help a station like that has absolutely nothing to do with whatever regulatory changes might benefit, say a WABC or a KNX or a WLS. And so you have that problem. How do you craft something that applies somehow to both of these completely different sets of operations now? So it's a huge challenge that they're going to face if they even really have the willpower to address AM radio in detail, which every opportunity the commission's had basically in the past 30 years, they've thrown up their hands and said, we'll let the next guys deal with it. It's a big challenge.
Well, perception is reality, and I think that's part of what's hurting it. And you're right, there are two factions to the industry, and I have met people who are making money and doing very well and enjoying a very nice lifestyle with their broadcast operations. But the perception is that overall AM is dead. And as long as that continues to be perception, people that may have the willingness or the funding to do something are on the fence. And it's a shame, but you're right. There are a lot of folks who are benefiting and doing very well for themselves, but the regulatory landscape is such that that perception that it's gone or useless or it's a waste of time is what I think is holding back a lot. And maybe if there was somebody could just step up and just say, hey, it works. It's happening. Here are the success stories. Let's do something to make those success stories move across the entire landscape. That's just my opinion.
Guys, you are watching or listening to This Week in Radio Tech. It's our 224th episode. Scott Fybush is our guest, and Chris Tobin is our co-host along with us. I'm Kirk Harnack, and our show is brought to you by the folks, in part by the folks at Lavo. I want to tell you about their crystal clear audio console. Check it out at lavo.com, L-A-W-O. That's how you spell it, L-A-W-O. Lavo is how you say it. The crystal clear is this gorgeous console because, well, the brains of it are, it's a one rack unit box that goes in the rack, and that's where the audio goes in and out. But the part that you use, the part that your disc jockeys, the part that you touch and use and mix with, it's a touch screen. Not only that, it's a multi-touch touchscreen. Not only that, it's a standalone PC. If something happens to it, if it just doesn't boot up one day, guess what? You're still on the air. You can bring another one in. It's just networked to the main unit, the 1RU DSP box. So the Crystal Clear has all these incredible features, just one after another. It's got, as I said, the multi-touch enabled control panel, intuitive controls. You touch something, and you know what? If it needs to bring up some options, it does. If it just needs to do what you touched it to do, that's what it does. So it's context sensitive in terms of things that you're touching. It does what you need it to do when you need it to do it. There are three mixing groups, of course, like so many consoles: Program 1, Program 2, and a record bus. There's a Q or pre-fader level available. Programmable scene presets recall every detail. The meters on it are precision stereo PPM meters. That's peak program meters. Euro and US operating modes for fader start or button start, depending on how you like to do it, and where you were taught radio, in Europe or in the US. A large time of day clock, of course, synchronizable to an NTP server. Talk buttons that automatically appear on mix minus channels. So if you need to talk, you can't talk back to a turntable or a CD player or even an automation system. But if you've got a codec or a telephone hybrid, or maybe a reporter coming in by satellite feed, and there's a talkback path through cell phone, touch the talkback button, and you're talking back to that person at the other end. Has an optional Ravenna audio over IP interface that is AES 67 compliant, so it works with other brands of gear that are also AES 67 compliant. It has some analog inputs and outputs, some AES EBU digital inputs and outputs. Power supply redundancy, that's very important for some folks. You got two power supplies there. And GPIO contact closures for on-air lamps, an input for cutting your speaker if you need to cut the speakers off, low noise mic preamps, just a whole list of features. But the coolest of which is that touchscreen, multi-touch and just very intuitive operation. Lavo showed this at the NAB show. Mike Dosh has been our guest there. He was part of the final design of this product, and you ought to check it out. Go to lavo.com, LAWO.com, and look under products and radio consoles. It's called the Crystal Clear, and they're calling it a virtual radio mixing console. I think they have bigger plans for it in the future, but if you want to check it out for your own studio, do so now at lavo.com. Thanks very much, Lavo, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech, where we're all about technology for radio. All righty, let's move. We got some Throwback Thursday, to use a Facebook term on us here. We've got some Throwback Thursday to go to. Scott, you have brought along with you some pictures. I'm not sure if I forwarded these to our producer yet. I think I did, but maybe I didn't. Let me go check. Andrew, if you're handy, did I didn't send you this link? Oh, you do? Yay. Okay, good. Whew.
Okay.
Scott set this up for us, and maybe Andrew, you can go ahead and pop a picture or two up, and Scott, tell us what we're looking at when we do.
What we are about to see here is one of the last RCA BTA 50F transmitters still in captivity. These were the
okay,
kind of the last of the big Art Deco RCAs.
Is it working?
It was.
Okay.
It is, within a few hours, it will be in pieces. So what you're seeing here, this is the station that is now known as WKNR 1220 in Cleveland. This is the old WGAR. That's probably the call sign everybody remembers it as.
Okay.
And at one time, it had two of these beasts, believe it or not. There was one in front that's long since gone away. It went to another station and I think is out of service. But this one that you're seeing here was brought in as a backup in about 1973. And it came out of Dallas-Fort Worth. This was the transmitter that powered the old WBAP and WFAA. Remember when they shared time on 820 with the cowbell that they rang to switch from one station to the other?
Not that old, of course, but yeah, I've heard of that.
This was, well, I'm not either, but this was major piece of radio history here.
Yeah.
So this was the 50,000 watt transmitter that was on their 820 frequency. And the transmitter site was being taken so they could build DFW Airport. If you ever changed planes at DFW, you've probably gone right past where this transmitter was. And the engineers at WGAR were basically told, get down to Dallas, take this thing with you, and get it out of here. They had to build an addition onto their building. This thing by itself is 20-some feet long. So they built an addition onto the back of the building to house it. It was an alternate main for many years and then a backup and has now been retired. And the good news is that it is being donated to a fellow named Jim Davison, who has a nonprofit that's building a museum of Cleveland radio. And in just a few short hours, I almost ended up going to Cleveland to watch them do this tonight. In just a few short hours, some of the same engineers who were around in 1973 and helped install this are going to be back there in Cleveland helping to take it apart and make sure that at least some big pieces of it get preserved.
Andrew, do you have some more pictures ready? There's one.
There we go. That's a neat one right there. If you go back one.
Oh, okay.
Well, that one right there, that's neat too. That's there are 4 of these 5671 transmitter tubes in there. And there's actually, the transmitter came with a pneumatic cart because you can't lift that thing out by yourself if you're trying to change out that tube.
What?
Weighs a lot more than you could possibly lift by yourself. So there's a cart that actually slides in underneath it and raises up the tube so that you can get it out of there. And there's the transmitter is essentially its own backup. There are multiple tubes in there, some of which can serve as backups, and you could wire it up, just like with the Westinghouse 50HG of the same vintage. You could wire that up as a 100 kilowatt transmitter if you wanted to.
I take it that's air cooled.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is definitely air cooled. There's no cooling.
Now these tubes hang now to younger engineers like myself. These are upside down. I never got to work on a transmitter that had these tubes that had the connections on the top side for the filament and the grid. But that's what we're looking at here, isn't it?
I believe it is. Would you want to try to suspend that much weight and try to get underneath it?
I guess
I wouldn't.
Ooh.
The rectifier stacks, I believe we're seeing. Yeah, there we go. We're seeing the rectifier stacks there, and it's interesting if you look as we scroll through those pictures. The transmitter is big enough; it actually has a door in the middle of it. One of the transmitter panels, right now you can see it in its closed position there, but one of those panels is actually a door. And in this photo here that we're seeing, we've actually walked through the door, and we are behind the transmitter, looking at the back end of it. And essentially, the building was built around the transmitter. I don't know if you wanted to get that all out in one piece. I'm not sure you even could anymore.
Wow. So those direct fire stacks. There's one of those might be a door.
Yep. The right there. If you look sort of that next one, you see where the WGAR corkboard is there.
Yeah.
And the door that it's in front of. The door just to the left of that is actually a door, and you can walk right through there and into the back of the transmitter.
Okay.
For maintenance, because it took up an entire wall of a building. There is one of these. There we go. There you can see the door.
It's open. Yeah.
There was one of these. WCFL in Chicago had one of these, and they took out. One of the issues with these transmitters, obviously, is they were pretty heavily loaded with PCBs in the transformers. So they removed the guts of the thing, and they realized if we were going to take the guts out, that they would have an entire empty wall of their transmitter building. And so they left the front of the transmitter there. So it's just a facade in Chicago with nothing behind it. But they left the facade there. This one, that whole facade is going to be removed and taken away to the museum. And hopefully at some point, right now it goes into storage, but hopefully at some point it will get resurrected and they'll at least manage to make it light up. I don't think it'll ever run again and make 50,000 watts, but you'll at least be able to get a sense of this is what was. Because there are not many of those out there anymore. They're few and far between. I think Como in Seattle still has one. There's a 50E, which was the predecessor to that one, which belonged to KOB in Albuquerque. That's in a museum now in Farmington, New Mexico. But other than that, there are not many out there.
What else is there in terms of pictures here?
Oh, there we go. There are power transformers. In a lot of cases, in a lot of these installations, those would have been down in the basement. In this particular case, they were just put behind the transmitter in a big open area there that I think maybe had once been a garage. But imagine, at one time there were 2 of these at WGAR and a full-time staff that was on duty pretty much 24/7 keeping them running. And nowadays there's a Nautel AmpFet there that just kind of goes. Yeah, there's a good shot. You can see the door right there. And that's where you would have walked in to service it. There's the view from the other side of the room.
Yeah, different perspective there. Look at those big, beautiful meters. You can see those from across the room.
Oh, there we go. And there's the nameplate. Thankfully, that will be saved. Those things by themselves have really become collector's items. There are people who kind of scavenge those and make sure they're taken care of. And in fact,
you got one yourself there.
This one, well, this is cheating a little bit. This one is from a TV transmitter. But this one came from Channel 13 right down the street from me in Rochester. And this was their original TV transmitter from 1962 when they signed on, and when they decommissioned it, when they went digital, they were kind enough to let me have it. So I've got that sitting here. But yeah, those old RCA logos by themselves are very coveted by collectors.
Wow. Thanks for that bunch of pictures and the tour. Now I'm sorry, this what year do you think that BTA 50F was made?
Early to mid 1950s. I think the last of them came off in about 1955. I think this one dates from 1953, 54, somewhere in there. But it's been very well kept up over the years. My understanding is that at least until recently, it could still run, which was pretty cool because there aren't many of those of that vintage that could still run. It's like that with those Westinghouses too. There are still a few of them around, but the only one that I know of that still actually can power up and go on the air is at WOWO in Fort Wayne. It is a beautiful, beautiful beast.
I've been there, but I missed the tour of that particular transmitter. Chris Tobin, you've having been up in the Northeast there, like as Scott is, you've been around some big 50 kilowatt AM transmitters that are probably pretty old. Tell us about your experience.
Yeah, I've had a chance to work around some of the old AM 50 kilowatt RCAs, the early Collins and Continentals. Not that the Continentals are old, but some of the early stuff, Doherty transmitters, those the AMs. I've had a couple of, let's see, there was a Westinghouse. There was also one, it was German. Is it Westinghouse or GE copied the German version of an AM transmitter with the glass front with the fluorescent lights in it?
I think that was the GE.
That was GE, yes. So I got to work on that. That was interesting because it was vintage 1940s, early 50s, and the wiring, I guess, vulcanized, the rubber, plastic, whatever they were using in the day. So the harnesses started to collapse and short out. It made for an interesting light show at times. So you tried not to go into the cabinet if you didn't have to. But yeah, I have fluorescent lights, long tubular lights on either side of the glass face that looked into the RF cavity, so you could see the transmitter tubes when they illuminated, and it was fun. But yeah, what was that?
Well, okay, so the transmitter we were just looking at, that RCA BTA 50F, I guess broadcast transmitter AM 50 kilowatts and the F version of it. I take it, Scott, that it used high-level plate modulation with a big modulation transformer?
Right, that's my understanding of it.
Yeah,
and so you saw some of those transformers in this case.
Yeah. So typically the big iron would be high voltage power supply transformer that took in 480 or 240 or whatever took in, probably 3-phase 480, and bumped it way up to some high voltage for the plate voltage. And then you had other big iron would be chokes. So you had big capacitors and big heavy iron chokes with lots of windings in those to give you smoother DC instead of pulsating DC. And then the other big piece of iron would be the very critical modulation transformer. And this would be the transformer that would actually buck or boost the plate supply for the modulation. I'm sorry, for the RF tubes, so that the RF tubes would basically receive audio varying B+. So that was one way to do it. Now they also could do some modulation schemes with the grid or the screen, maybe to tweak things. But a plate modulated transmitter is basically as I described. So what I was getting at is, do we know when the ampliphase transmitters came along? These were transmitters that would put out or they would consume a constant amount of power, but two amplifiers would change their phase relative to one another, and their combination would then produce amplitude modulated RF, which is what they were trying to get. Chris Tobin, you got any ampliphases in your history?
That was
only
the generation.
One I visited way back in the day. I think it was WHN 1050 here in the New York area. Those of us who have worked on them, and I did not work on them extensively, but I have friends who did. They used to be known as the amplifuzz.
Sure.
Because the audio quality would shift as the you had to keep everything linear. If I remember correctly, that transmitted power supplies, voltages, everything had to stay very, very tight tolerance. Otherwise, it would move around. It took a lot to maintain it. But yeah, that was an interesting transmitter.
That was, if I remember my RCA history correctly, that was the generation right after this one. So I think the 50G was the Ampliphase 50. And KFBK out in Sacramento had a prototype. Their claim to fame out there, they built a lot of their own stuff over the years, the McClatchy stations out in California. And their claim to fame was that they were the first ones who adapted what had been this European, I think it was actually a French design originally, and they had built their own, and then RCA kind of modified it based on what McClatchy had learned. So that I believe is where that came out of. It was right around that same era too. That was when Gates was doing the Vapor Phase 50, as I recall. I think that was right around late 50s, early 60s, somewhere in there.
Scott, you're very accurate, especially with the McClatchy information. I was just reading Wikipedia while you were talking, thinking Scott must have written this entry in Wikipedia. The Ampliphase design, apparently, though, was first proposed, not built, but proposed way back in 1935. That's when somebody thought of doing this. We need to have a whole show on Ampliphase, because I never worked on one, but I think it's a fascinating technology. And engineers who knew how to keep ampliphases running, apparently they sounded great, because they didn't have all of the difficulty with modulation and audio linearity, because it was two constant amplifiers just changing phase with relation to one another and then combining. There'd be a reject load also, so you'd have wasted power, but what came out toward the antenna, if everything was working right, would be just beautiful AM modulated RF. So
yeah, and they did require careful setup and tuning to keep that distortion to a minimum, so they had a great sound. They were a more efficient method than traditional plate modulation, but the hard part was keeping them tuned and properly cared for, and that's where the Amplifuzz, I think, moniker came. Was just that you had to work it. You had to work the box.
We'll do a show on old AM transmitters. That's great. Good to see those pictures, Scott. Thanks for that. Hey, Scott, in your calendar, you show tower sites. Do you get a chance to show transmitters in those tower sites, or is it always land and towers?
Not so much in the calendar itself. Where the transmitters show up is on my website.
Okay.
Where if you go to Fybush.com, you go to Tower Site of the Week. Every Friday, there's a tour inside somebody's studios or somebody's transmitter site. That's where we get more deeply inside with the transmitters and the studio facilities, and sometimes some even more interesting behind the scenes. Right now, the one that's up there right now from this past Friday is KBRT, the Crawford station out in Los Angeles, the new site that they built when they moved off of Catalina Island. And they went up to their new site up in the hills above Orange County. And that's featured there right now. The one actually, interestingly, that goes up tomorrow, as soon as I finish writing it and get ready to go up there, one of the things that we're going to see is another RCA that's being rescued, a 5 kilowatt of about this same vintage that was just rescued out of Kogo in San Diego. Clear Channel was going to get it out of their building, and a buddy of mine named Scotty Rice managed to save the entire thing and spent a lot of late nights out there dismantling it. And he's got it in storage, looking for a place that can go at least back up for display, so that some of this history can be preserved.
Wow. Hey, I got to tell you, I forget to look at this website. I forgot about the Tower Site of the Week. Scott, I'm sure you have enough to do, but if you could schedule an announcement on your Facebook page, then I'd see it to remind me to.
There.
Yeah. Pardon?
It's every Friday morning.
It does?
It auto
Oh,
posts
yeah.
there. It's
I
it's the
need to make
vagaries
you
of
one.
Facebook. Whoever knows you post something, you never know who actually sees it. Is the
I
problem?
know. I need to make you one of my extra super special friends and monitor
Ooh,
everything you do. Like I need to stalk you.
Yeah, there you go.
This is cool. I got to put this on my to-do list then for Fridays is go look at Scott Fybush's Tower Side of the Week. Now, Scott, we just got a few minutes left in the show, but what part of your work is available at no charge by going to your website, and what part do you have a paywall for some of the information you provide to broadcasters?
The paywall goes on the current issue of Northeast Radio Watch, which is the column that I've been doing since way back in 1994 already. And that chronicles everything that's going on, engineering, station sales, personnel moves, so on and so forth. Basically everything east of Ohio and north of Maryland and up into Canada. And I kind of think of it as the tribal drum of the industry. But Tower Side of the Week is available for free. The archives for it, if you're a subscriber, you get the access to the index that lets you go through and find everything that I've posted over the last 15 years or so. But each individual piece that goes up on Friday goes up for free. It's a trade-off. I like to make this stuff as available as I can. At the same time, it's nice to be able to keep a roof over the head, too.
Sure. Cool. All right. Well, hey, we're going to talk about keeping a roof over the head and the calendar. And also one more news item to talk about after the break here, and that is the NAB has made a plea to BMW. We're going to explore that in just a minute. Right now, let's talk about Axia. Axia, the folks, part of the Telos Alliance, the folks who invented a practical audio over IP for broadcasters. And practical in terms of broadcasters means low latency. Check out the website, axiaaudio.com, and you'll see, of course, the equipment and pictures of studios and ideas on how to build a new studio. If you've got an STL transmitter that's on a penthouse in the next building down the block, ways to get that done. Lots of ideas on building efficient and easy to take care of and perfect sounding broadcast studios and routing systems. And the reason that Axia is in a position to do this is because of the leadership position that the folks at Axia, the engineers, the executive management, set the example set by Steve Church, the founder of Telos and Axia, in putting forth audio over IP for broadcasters. A couple of things that are that are worth talking about in terms of Axia's leadership. Greg Shea has been on the show. He's the chief science officer for the Telos Alliance. He's actually one of the patent holders on the original idea of Livewire. Livewire uses very standard protocols. What's patented is a timing scheme that lets everything talk to each other over a jittery local area network, jittery and compared to the actual audio and packets. But there's an article about this on the website. If you look under Telos Alliance's Greg Shea says AES 67 is absolutely safe. And to more on the leadership side, the Telos Alliance, and Greg Shea were founding members of the X192 committee that then became the AES 67 standard. And by the way, that was no rubber stamp committee. We had manufacturers, designers, and theoreticians from several different disciplines working together to come up with a standard that is now known as AES 67. Axia had the first broadcast product in the U.S. with AES 67 compliance, and that's the Axia X node. We get more partners all the time at Axia. Logitech, the console manufacturer, is now a partner with Axia, as are a bunch of other companies. You go to a partners page on the Axia website, and you'll just see company after company after company that has brought on board the Livewire standard. Companies like A to Z in Paris, France. They're a big integrator, and they make their own equipment too. A company called Axel Technologies, Broadcast Electronics, BSI, Burley, Dabis, Dalet, David Systems, Digimedia, Digispot. You can tell I'm going alphabetically here. Innis Corporation, and some of their cool products there. OMT, OpX, Rivendell. I'm putting in a Rivendell system now. It's fully Axia compatible and just as cool as can be. Vox Pro, Wide Orbit, Xenon Media, and then hardware manufacturers like Maya, Nautel. Of course, Omnia is. Paravel makes a routing box. Studer, Sound 4, XI Audio. So it's all about who you can talk to. And when you're building studios and you need to add this equipment or that equipment, it's great when you don't have to break it out to analog or even break it out to AES. You can just network the stuff together. And that's where Axia's leadership role has really led to convenience for broadcast engineers like you and me to be able to assemble studios, put them together quickly, get all the functionality you could ever want or imagine. As we heard, for example, last week on last week's show with Rob Chickering about all the functionality that he's able to get just by doing some configuration on network connected broadcast devices. So if you want to just get a little example of how Axia is leading the charge and demonstrating leadership in audio over IP for broadcasters, check out the website. It's axiaaudio.com. There are news items in the bottom left corner. There's a whole series of white papers and how-to papers. If you'll go through and just skim those, you're going to be impressed as to how Axia is helping broadcasters just get it done. And that's all I got to say. axiaaudio.com. Thanks for being one of the sponsors on This Week in Radio Tech. All right, Scott, there's some rumblings about the NAB saying, please, BMW, don't do that. What are they talking about?
They are talking about BMW's flashy new hybrid car, I guess actually all-electric car, which reportedly is not going to have an AM radio in it because the engineers at BMW are saying they can't find an economical way to make AM radio work in a car with all this electronic stuff going on around it. And the NAB is making a plea to have them rethink this decision and find a way to put in whatever filters they need to put in or whatever DSP they need to put in to make it work and keep AM radio available.
Wow. Chris Tobin, what are the problems when you've got big electric motors powering you down the road and AM radio reception?
Lots of noise. Well, you don't even have to worry about the motors themselves. There's noise everywhere else these days that's being generated in the car, let alone the engine itself.
Noise from square waves from computer circuits?
Heck yeah.
Charging systems?
What do they call that? The computer language protocol for car diagnostics. That computer alone makes noise.
CAN bus? Or something else?
No, not the CAN bus, but there's a name for the, when you buy the little adapters you can plug in and see.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise in the cars. I've one of the cars I got into a rental recently. I just had my AM portable, my little Sony I carry with me, and AM FM portable, and it picked up. I could move it around, and listen, and sniff out the noise all around the interior of the car. I was like, oh, look at that. So yeah, it's a tough one.
So, wow. It makes me think, okay, do cars have to comply with some kind of rules about generation or emission of electromagnetic spectrum on the one hand? On the other hand, you shield all this stuff. I mean, look, square waves, and that's what digital technology is, a lot of square waves. Square waves make noise. Square waves are noise. Square waves have broadband noise contained in them because they're square. And this stuff leaks out. Hey, as a manufacturer, Telos and every other manufacturer has to test their gear to make sure it doesn't emit too much and doesn't receive interference. We spend a lot of time and money making sure that, if you ever get a piece of gear and there's, 80 screws in the top cover, well, believe me, the manufacturer had no desire to put 80 screws in the top cover, but to make it meet emission standards, it had to have enough screws in there to keep any, short wavelength from getting out of that connection between the top and the sides. It's a tough job. And AM radio, what is AM but just a receiver of, if there's no signal there, of noise.
Mm-hmm.
You see a way around this, Scott or Chris?
This actually comes back, if you go in and you start reading a lot of the comments in the FCC AM proceeding, a fair number of them basically say, hey, FCC, you have these standards that are set out in Part 15 for what are called unintentional radiators. Yeah. How about you start actually finding a better way to enforce them? And, the problem is, and it's a problem for the industry now, people are much more interested at this point in having their devices and having their chargers for their devices and having their, I love my big flat screen that I have downstairs. I don't want to give that up, even if it makes some noise on the AM band. And I also don't want to pay a significant amount more for it to make it quieter. Well, maybe I do, but the average consumer doesn't. And so, it's something that was very much let out of the bag, and to go through now and try to make those standards work again. Chris talked about some of the challenges of having to start from ground zero. That would be a start from ground zero kind of thing. It would be very difficult and expensive to do.
Yeah. If AM went all digital, does that solve any of that problem? or does it just hide it until it gets too bad?
It would probably hide some of it. I mean, there are digital systems out there, radio systems used in other industries that do mask a lot of the noise in the environment they work in. But if the noise floor reaches a certain level, those digital receivers do collapse and have, bit error rates that can't be recovered. It's hard to say. I mean, in the current state, the digital radio that's available for broadcasters, I'm not sure how robust that is. My experience has not been very good with it, so I don't know. But, again, we're trying to enforce something that should have been done, over time, during the normal course of business. Now we're playing catch up. It's going to be a tough one.
You can do a lot with digital signal processing, even to try to clean up an analog signal.
Yep.
The challenge is you've got a chip that costs some amount of money, and manufacturers who are extremely cost conscious about every piece of equipment, especially that goes into a car, we may look at it and say, well, it's only $2 or $3 more to add this DSP chip. They look at it and say, yeah, $2 or $3 across a production run of millions of cars costs us real money. Tell us why it's in our interest to do that. And our industry has not necessarily been good at speaking with one voice and saying, here's why, whereas something like satellite radio, for instance, comes in and says, here's a very large check that tells you why. So it's kind of a challenge for the industry as a whole, as fractured as it can be sometimes, and it's good that the NAB is getting involved in this maybe, to find a way to come in and say, if we still want to be a presence on these dashboards of the future, somebody's got to help pony up to make it happen.
Exciting times, depressing times, good times for interesting opportunities. We're talking about AM broadcasting, and we got to go. Our time's up. Scott Fybush, thank you very much for being on the show with us. And if I want to pre-order my catalog for 2015, my signature edition, what do I do?
We just opened pre-ordering on them. They should be shipping, I'm hoping, middle of September, maybe end of September. Fybush.com, Fybush.com. You click on the shop link. Lisa's just been busy rebuilding the store, and we've got that up and running in much better fashion now. You can go ahead and pre-order. Supports the work that I do, and put something pretty on your wall for next year. You get to see on the cover, I'll give you a preview of the cover, you get to see an AM quadplex.
A quadplex? Oh, wow. And look, I complained about no transmitter buildings, and there's a good close-up of a transmitter building.
Yeah.
This was in April 2014.
Spokane, Washington.
KXLY?
Yep.
Kixley.
Yeah, part of the KXL network that was all through the Northwest. There are a whole bunch of them.
Wow, nice. All right. Chris Tobin, thank you for being with us. Appreciate you being there. The best-dressed engineer in radio. And how can folks get hold of you? Some folks have already done this week. Support at ipcodex.com. I'll be more than happy to get back to you from there. The man with email and no website. Support at ipcodex, plural.com. And you want to figure out this IP thing, Chris is your guy. He'll help you figure it out. Scott, thanks for being with us. Hope things are getting better for your family and auto situation. And I'm very delighted that you are part of our industry, and I get to do a very tiny part of supporting your efforts. I really enjoy it. Thanks for being there.
Much appreciated. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
All right. And thanks to our sponsors on This Week in Radio Tech, Axia Audio, also the folks at Lavo, makers of the Crystal Clear console, and the folks at Telos and the Telos Zip 1. Check them all out. The links will be on the website on every episode. Thanks to Andrew Zarian and the terrific GFQ Network for distributing this show, making it possible for us to do it. I really appreciate Andrew and all the work that he does. And we got to go. We're going to see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye, everybody.